Real estate words and terms with meanings and examples, part number 7. Adjustable rate mortgage, ARM, which means a mortgage with an interest rate that changes periodically based on a financial index. For example, a buyer takes a 5/1 ARM with a fixed rate for 5 years, after which the rate adjusts annually. This means the interest rate stays fixed at first and then changes each year based on the market. Amortization, which means spreading loan payments over time until the loan is fully paid off. For instance, a 30-year mortgage is amortized with equal monthly payments that cover both principal and interest. This means the borrower pays the loan gradually with each payment reducing the balance. Annual Property Operating Data, APOD, which means summary of income and expenses for an investment property. For example, an investor uses APOD to analyze whether a rental property produces positive cash flow. This means the document helps them see if the income exceeds expenses. Appraisal, which means professional assessment of a property's market value. For instance, the lender ordered an appraisal to confirm the home's value before approving the buyer's loan. This means the lender needed an expert's valuation to ensure the property is worth the loan amount. Appreciation, which means increase in property value over time. For example, the house she bought for $250,000 appreciated to $300,000 in 5 years. This means the home's market value grew by $50,000. As-is condition, which means selling property with no repairs or warranties from the seller. For instance, the home was sold in as-is condition, so the buyer accepted all defects without negotiation. This means the seller made no promises to fix anything before closing. Assessed value, which means value assigned by the tax authority for property tax purposes. For example, the county assessor set the home's assessed value at $275,000, which determines the property tax. This means taxes are based on this valuation, not the market price. Assignment, which means transfer of rights or interests in a contract. For instance, the tenant assigned their lease to a friend, who took over the remaining rental term. This means the lease obligations and rights were transferred to someone else. Balloon mortgage, which means a mortgage with small regular payments and a large final payment. For example, a buyer took a 7-year balloon mortgage with low monthly payments and a large balance due at the end. This means most of the loan is paid in one lump sum later. Balloon payment, which means a large payment due at the end of a loan term. For instance, the borrower made small monthly payments, then paid a $100,000 balloon payment at the end. This means the majority of the loan was paid off in one final payment. Bankruptcy, which means legal process where a person or business declares inability to pay debts. For example, after falling behind on mortgage payments, the owner filed for bankruptcy to stop foreclosure. This means they used legal protection to restructure or cancel debts. Basis, which means original cost of property, used for tax calculation. For instance, a couple bought a home for $320,000, which became their basis when calculating capital gains. This means $320,000 is used to measure how much profit they make when selling. Beneficiary, which means a person who receives benefits from a will, trust, or insurance. For example, the daughter was named the beneficiary of her father's property trust. This means she will inherit the property or its income. Bridge loan, which means a short-term loan used until permanent financing is secured. For instance, the buyer used a bridge loan to buy a new home while waiting to sell their old one. This means they borrowed money temporarily to cover the gap between purchases. Broker, which means a licensed person who arranges real estate transactions. For example, the broker helped the seller list the home and negotiated offers from buyers. This means they represented the seller in the transaction. Broker's commission, which means payment to a broker for services, usually a percentage of the sale price. For instance, the seller paid a 5% broker's commission after the home was sold. This means the broker earned a fee based on the selling price. Building code, which means regulations that set standards for construction and safety. For example, the contractor had to follow local building codes when adding a new room. This means they had to meet legal standards for materials, design, and safety. Buy down, which means paying extra upfront to reduce the loan interest rate temporarily or permanently. For instance, the seller offered to buy down the buyer's mortgage rate to make the deal more attractive. This means the seller paid upfront to help lower the buyer's interest rate. Buyer's agent, which means a real estate agent who represents the buyer in a transaction. For example, the buyer's agent scheduled showings and helped negotiate a lower purchase price. This means the agent worked in the buyer's best interest. Cap rate, capitalization rate, which means a formula that evaluates the return on an investment property. For instance, the investor used a 6% cap rate to determine if the rental income justified the property price. This means they assessed how profitable the investment would be. Capital expenditure, CapEx, which means major spending on property improvements or upgrades. For example, replacing the roof and HVAC system were classified as capital expenditures. This means these are large, long-term investments in the property. Cash flow, which means the net amount of income remaining after expenses. For instance, the rental brought in $2,000 monthly and had $1,400 in costs, leaving $600 in positive cash flow. This means the investor earns $600 profit each month. Certificate of occupancy, which means an official document stating a building is safe and ready for use. For example, the city issued a certificate of occupancy after the final inspection of the new apartment. This means the building met safety and zoning requirements. Chain of title, which means history of ownership for a property. For instance, the title company checked the chain of title to confirm there were no disputes or missing records. This means they verified all past transfers of ownership. Closing, which means final step in a real estate transaction when ownership transfers. For example, the buyer signed the paperwork and received the keys at closing. This means the deal was completed and the buyer became the new owner.